Okay, here we go. I've got a dual, so we're grabbing it via Zoom and then also live on YouTube today. As you have seen, I have been quiet for a while, monitoring the traffic, getting my thumb on what's going on, kind of stepping back because we stepped into a world where all the information became jumbled. And we knew that this was happening, but it came to a level of such a shift that up and down just wasn't making sense. So I continue to connect the dots. And this I think you're going to find very, very interesting. And I hope somebody grabs this and runs a little bit further. So first of all, we have the United States Space Force. And we recall from history, this is not something that's new and was not newly appointed by our former president, but rather it's something that he put into the spotlight and acknowledged existed, right? It was reframed. And so this has been going on for decades. And I've gone through the history on one of the other communications that I put out there. But the reality is this has existed. It's existed a long time under other departments, and it just became publicly known specifically in August of 2019. And then a re-announcement in December of 2019 as well. This was on the heels of the space announcements that we had come out publicly in December of 2018. So there was a lot of shifts coming on there. Out of this, we were also told we had 180 days in 2020 in order well, the government had 180 days in order to release the documents that pertained to the skies. And of course, it was so heavily redacted and dripped out that it was a nothing burger, as they say. And yet, we all know that there's something more there. But the point is, it's been suppressed for a very, very long time. And I'm going to bring this up in one of the sections on why the suppression was expected, but why is it now not being suppressed? So I want to take a step through this. And again, here's the website. So if you want to take a peek at that, it's quite a bit of information. Now I do see this is Space Force. Why are the headers, right? We're playing politics even here. Okay, so let's continue here. Now remember there was this conversation um, of games in the background, and it was maybe Germany, maybe Italy, it was maybe Russia, it was maybe, it bounced around the narrative. But the bottom line is during this period of time, we saw released images of where the um, choices that we were submitting were being bounced from one location to another. And one of the conversations that I had during that period of time is we were actually watching it live that night, is they were bouncing outside the US and bouncing back in. Now, this is important for a number of reasons. Now, the media picked up on this because when information bounces outside the United States and bounces back in, all of a sudden it's under different jurisdiction. So let's liken it to a Google email. Google has servers all over the planet. And often your email will not go from you directly to your phone or you to your next door neighbor. It bounces amongst many servers. Now that makes sense if you're in a region and it's looking for speed, but it doesn't make sense if that information is bouncing from, let's say, California to England. Why is it bouncing? Because the moment that that data crosses wires or crosses via satellite, whatever that is, but the data leaves the United States and touches base in a foreign land, then all of a sudden, when that information comes back into the United States, it's under a different jurisdiction. So in this case, NSA, SEI, you go down the list, they now have rights to grab that data and start monitoring accordingly. You've given them that right because you're using a public system. The servers are overseas. It bounced. It came back into this country. They're responsible to secure the country. There you go. So that's really important. But the other thing that we saw is as it was bouncing, we were also watching real time that the choices that people were putting in were not only going up, but at periods of time they stopped. And at periods of time, even more curious, they actually decreased. Now, when you're adding into a system of people casting their opinion, that number should never, ever, ever go down, right? And the votes from the selections from one to the other don't hop back and forth. And yet we could see as the bounces occurred and changes happened, there was a lot of of these puzzle pieces that were coming together. So whether or not this particular issue happened is not what I'm going to stick on today, but we do know that the machines had modems. The modems had instructions in their manual how to link them to the internet. And we also know that the internet was not just hardwired, it connected also via satellites. It bounced into the satellites and then back down into different locations. That was the fastest way for them to grab the data and push updated data. So we do know we have evidence of a challenge in this direction. Now, what's interesting here, if we go back to this conversation, Space Force Operated Defense Support Program, DSP, satellites are a key part of North America's early warning systems. In their 22,300 mile geosynchronous orbit, DSP satellites help protect the United States and its allies by detecting these launches, space launches, and also nuclear, right? So these are safety nets that are put up around this planet. And when you look at the Zoom that I will post after this to go ahead and see the images if you want, you can see the net that's been created around the Earth. And we also knew quite a bit of this from Elon Musk launching his satellites. You know, if you're out there at the right time, you can see the whole string fly over your home. But what all is being used with that data, right? We have very little control. Even what we're told is incomplete at best. So if we look here, this is what prompted me to dig a little bit deeper. The Space Force takes over all military satellite communications, all of them. Now, this might seem like a logical step. Hey, you got the Space Force, you've got satellites in space. That would be the place to go, right? Well, there's some curious points to here. And on this is military.com. I do find this site very reliable. I suggest that if you're not already monitoring it, it's one that you take a peek of or at least bookmark for yourself. But the Army is where it came from. And this is a recent decision, and it's recent going into our next opportunity to cast our opinions. So what else? We now know, based on the information over here, that something happened when we suggested, right? And then it was used on satellites. We now know we're going into the next opportunity, and lo and behold, this changes situation. So what we want to do is take a peek further here. So I went ahead and as you can see, I did a search here, Space Force General, and it came up General John W. J. Raymond, and he was introduced. There were two gentlemen actually introduced, and I could not find anything on the other gentleman today, which is very interesting. But this gentleman was introduced by our former president. And so I wanted to look into this a little bit higher. He is noted as being the highest person in the Space Force. And we look at his, oops, here we go. Looks like it's not coming through. Okay, so let me just click on this link here. The goal is to see a little bit more about who this person is, where he came from. So they've got a great resume here, strong history, background. If any of you work in these areas, you can give me a little bit more information on this. But of course, it goes through, we really want to look at where he's been recently. So he was promoted, right, 2014, at this level, and then he went to a general in October of 2016. Now, what else happened as we were going into 2016, right in November? And then in April of 2022. Why is there a change here? Okay, so as we ask, who is actually commander-in-chief? We know the person sitting in, well, we can't even say sitting in that location is, but who's pulling the strings here, and why is this change happening now? And I'm going to show another point of this in a minute. So here we go. It did come up. Okay, so let me skip forward here. Now, we also know that there were live maps that you could watch at the time. My searches today, I couldn't find it, and there are links in, you know, I did a really long expose before anybody else came out with monitoring State Street and the D word. So that is all actually in my earlier videos as well. And you just look for about the time that that happened, right about October, November, and that would show you that information. But remember everything that hit us. Now, this is the New York Times. It came up with the familiar playbook, and playbook is a key word because everything is a playbook. One of the core reasons why our former president is absolutely not desired at all is there's a playbook. Everybody agrees to these rules, everybody plays by these rules. And the same strategy is used over and over and over again. So what do they do with the strategy? They attack their opponents. They attack their opponents and they increase and attack their opponents until their opponents back down, go home, and we always hear the phrase spending more time with family. But we have one individual who didn't play that game. Anytime he was attacked, he came back stronger and went to continue to drain the swamp, right? So we know that there's a playbook and we know that somebody's not playing by the rules of the game that have been established. But what else do we have? We had the challenges with another government changing and controlling data, and that would be the second one listed here. Then we've got this whole propaganda that came up that turns out wasn't quite true in the manner presented to us, and in fact was this government didn't even want to play ball, as the evidence showed, so there could not have been any. And then, of course, we were all locked in our homes for our safety, right? When you're locked in your homes, you might have a private opinion or a private consciousness, but it reduces the public awareness or shift from private, meaning I think I know about it, I might have doubts, nobody else is saying anything, so I'm not sure where this is going, I probably shouldn't embarrass myself. Two, yes, we know the truth, there is a problem, and we all need to come up with a solution together. But when you're locked in your home, you're isolated, and 24 hours a day, you're getting fed lies via quote unquote, the news, then it really shifted the direction and controlled us mentally. But as we move forward, there was quite a conversation going on again about overseas connection. And here we also had a conversation again about in this year, the quote unquote thought process just kept popping up and being squandered down. And this is what I'll tie at the end. Instead of being known as a conspiracy, it kind of became a spoiler alert as we move forward. But what else is going on in this world? During this period of time, there's been a number of other countries launching satellites. One of the most interesting is this one. In April of 2020, this country launched, right? But what about this here? In June of 2022, another major one, and a different country helped them launch it. Now, this is an interesting path to go down, but they're being assisted by putting their satellites up as well. Now, I want to switch. We talked about the formation, or at least the public notice of the Space Force. We've talked about the challenges around casting our vote. And, it's baffling to me, but there are individuals right now that still say, sit down and shut up, that this didn't happen. But really, if it didn't, then how about the choice that was made? Do you feel good about what's happening in this country and this world right now? So the facts are clearly in one direction. And I know we go back to the statement that it's easier to fool somebody than to show them that they've been fooled, but this is really head in the sand phenomena, what's been going on. And for those who follow our manual, which many refer to as the Bible, there's a clear understanding that many will have their eyes and ears closed. And that's really the peak of an explanation for what's going on, or the start of an explanation for what's going on. But here, this is really interesting. Over the last few days, and this is even 2 hours ago posted on MSN, but we're getting all these news media sites that Congress has shifted the terminology of a UFO. So formerly, UFO was just an unidentified foreign object, right? unidentified flying object, something flying in space, we can't identify it. And that does not mean that that is something from outside of our solar system, outside of our, it doesn't mean that it's non-human. It just means that, hey, I look at it, I can't identify it. Now that would be me in the ground looking up. But of course, with the high-tech tools and satellites, looking from all positions on these items, it was easy to determine whether or not, in fact, they were from, man-made or not. However, up until that point where that determination was clear, it was just a UFO. And again, the distinction is very, very clear that that just meant I don't know what it is, right? It's unidentified, period. However, Congress is now making the change that it is not man-made if you're using that term. Now, remember, the Secretary of State, we'll just call her Chillery, had made a statement that it wasn't UFOs anymore. It was, I think she said UAPs. We were already starting to see an exploration and a messing around with this concept. And as we move forward, this becomes very, very important because in the intelligence community, we have known for a long time that this playbook that I talked about is going to run forward. And we have been warned by many insiders that one of the final cards that they have in the deck against to play against us is to in fact pull out the card of this threat of imminent domain, right? This threat that will bring us together. And we know of that from the speech that was given by this president. And if you want to play it, you certainly can. But essentially the reminder is, what would it be like if there was a force outside this planet that brought us all together? The seed has been planted for a long time. And this was only 2006. Although I do have to admit, I thought it was the 80s. But what happens is we're being primed, and anybody who spoke out was taken down, right? And yet there's been a drip here and a drip here, and we want truth here, we want truth here. Well, we know now that truth is being manipulated, and we know it's in the playbook to bring us all together to do something in our skies. We'd all assumed it would probably be on a hologram level, but they have the technology at this point to do it for real and make it seem like an invasion, which will then, just like the attacks in September on the 11th, that went ahead and took away rights and privacies of citizens. You scare somebody enough, rather than running for freedom, they run for security. And we all know, we've heard this time and time again. There's two doors in life. You choose security and you lose everything. The door for freedom is what you always want. Now, what's interesting here is they're tying it to the Bible. All of a sudden, people are being more biblical. Now, I do acknowledge from a Christian perspective that in fact, more people are waking up. And this is just a beautiful turn that we've seen. When the darkness hit, light shined brighter and people started seeking out the light. And we've seen that across the board. But this is not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is a deep manipulation. So part of the playbook from the insiders that we've known for years, all the way back to the insider that came over from Germany and was part of Project Paperclip, that one of the final cards that they're going to play is a so-called invasion that they are manufacturing in order to take control and lead us into this one, right? And then the world, and then government. And this is the play that they're trying to do. So here I've got them tying it together. But again, this is not the Christian perspective. The returned Christ with his armies of aliens and UFOs may actually be an invasion of Earth by aliens and UFOs in 2022, 2023. And this is referring to Revelation 19. Now, God teaches us right there in the opening lines of Revelation that Revelation is the only book of the Bible that those who read will be rewarded, right? All of the lessons are put in there for our understanding, our teaching, to see how other people have developed themselves through Christ and been led to the Lord, and decisions that have made, and the trials that people face that they're able to overcome one way or another. But Revelation promises a reward for reading. I suggest pull it up. Look at Revelation, do a study of it. There's plenty of YouTube individuals who reviewed it. And I always point to James Cadiz. He's actually done several series on digging apart Revelation, and he did one with Monkey that is phenomenal. That was produced just a few months ago, I believe, may have even been 4 months ago by now. But what we want to look at is this false crossover of what's happening. What we see in the skies today is not off planet. That is not where we're at right now. What we see in our skies today is man-made. If in fact we have any level of invasion, and this is a core of why I'm doing this right now, we have to be very, very clear that we're not engaging in this kind of game. If there is any kind of threat from our skies, any kind of quote unquote invasion that threatens our liberties or our safety, it is man-made. It is not extraterrestrial in the sense that we've been told. They are setting up a game that's going to roll out, and we are not to run in fear with this. That's not what this is. Last night, I even heard a scenario that they're planning to have a shuttle system, which is suborbital. And this is what, Virgin Galactic did. Any of these did that they said they took people outer space. They were actually suborbital. They stayed within our orbit, took people up. They floated around, played a little bit, came back down. So they want to put shuttles in that arena and then bring them up to a mothership. And they say they're going to do this, some keywords here, in the blink of an eye. And in a blink of an eye, they are relating it back to the Bible and back into Revelation. That is not the path we want to take. So we do know that we have to be very, very careful at this point in our lives. The truth is being contaminated. We really have to go back to our manual and understand where we came from, what our life path is, and how the story ends. We need to have an understanding of the truth. And the manipulation that we've seen occur through all the systems that we now partake in, the key system that we learned about over the last 2 years being the education system. From day one in kindergarten, our children are taught about the cute little balls that float in space. And yet even that is a lie, as we have found out. So we want to go back to what we know is the truth. We want to go back to the core understanding of using critical thinking, what we can decipher for ourselves. And here I wanted to point out the term last night came in the blink of an eye, referring to the rapture in Revelation, which is a crossover that is not the path that we're taking with the spaceships hovering to take us off this planet. That is not what's going to be happening. But here they're tying that word and they're using it more and more. Life evolved in the blink of an eye. Right? There's quite a bit of twisting that we're seeing going on here. And here we go again. We save humanity from itself. We're seeing this more and more come up in terms in society. Now, there's several videos coming up as well. Ascension, rapture, pole shift. They're exploring these more and more in different directions. And I really want to caution you. There's a playbook being played out. And even if people are believing now that this is the path that we're going down, this is a false narrative. It is part of the strategy. So again, we look at the difference between conspiracy theory and what we've realized now is those for years who have shouted at the top of their lungs and warned you and warned you and warned you and been told that no, that's wrong, that's crazy, you don't have evidence, even though they have a preponderance of evidence. The gaslighting has taken over. But now we realize that in fact, all those warnings have been merely spoiler alerts. So what I wanted to do was go back here. From the beginning, we went ahead, let me see if I can map this, looking here. So we started here and we went to identify who is it currently in charge, right? And this person changed roles This says current in 2022. I'm sorry, I misinterpreted this one. It was the other one that we're going to look at. But in 2016, October, right before this period of our opinions came in, right? And that's this individual. But we do know that this Space Force spun out of the Army. So I typed in here US Commander-in-Chief in 2022. Now what's interesting is we have been told that the Commander-in-Chief is the person who sits in that one building in DC, correct? But we know that individual is not making any life decisions, even about a meal, more or less a military strategy. But when I typed this in, this is what came up. And it says this gentleman became commanding officer in July of 2022. July of 2022 was just last month. And after he was put in that position, there was a decision to spin off out of his control. Now, I will tell you something about the military or about the government. You are nothing in the government unless you have a pyramid scheme going of the most amount of individuals and departments under you. So any kind of spinoff is a very interesting thing to watch, more or less, the timing of this. So again, July of 2022, right when all this narrative is starting to shift once again. So if we look here, the person before was this person, and they were in the role for 3 years, 109 days. So, you know, that's a decent amount of time, and they were put in. Let's see if we can go up a little bit so you can see the chart. They took office, they left office, and the length of the term, right? So if we look down here, they took office. There's been several changes here, right? So here's 2015, 2018. So we know what happened in the middle there. We've got 2018 to 2019. But look, this one went from a decent amount of time. This one went to less than half a year. But it was acting. So once they found somebody else, then they went ahead and put this person in. And this person again was about the same period of time. However, why then was somebody else brought in right here before we start choosing, right? So as I look forward again, we've kind of gone through these threads. And again, there's more questions and answers here. But here's the US Space Force, and it just announced that in fact, it is now in charge of all US satellites, all of them. And then here we have a header of the main propaganda that we've been up against over the last couple years. We know that there's been a change of command that made this, this decision for this release. And so there's a lot more questions here as this ties together. Does in fact the Space Force have anything to do with our satellites? Well, the answer is yes, we've been told that. Does the Space Command have anything to do with our putting our opinions out there every few years? Well, we learned that specifically in 2020, and there's been more evidence that has come out since then. And for those of you who sat through the cyber symposium this weekend, there was plenty more evidence around that. The information bounced. So now we have a connection between those two. And we also know there's an intelligence playbook that is moving towards taking away our rights and security. And the best way we've learned to do that is push people into such fear that they willingly give it up. So what I ask you now today is, what path is being created for us? What path is being paved? And as this path unravels through this playbook that keeps playing over and over again, stand strong. This isn't a matter of falling for it. This is a matter of understanding that we've been warned. We've been told that this is a game that they're playing. And there is not going to be a spaceship hovering over this planet, taking us all up in the form of a rapture. That's not what's going to happen. And Christians need to hold the line on this one. We have been warned that there's a very strong possibility that this November, our opinions may not be given. There's going to be something on such a level that in fact it can't happen at that period of time, and it will have to be pushed out. And this is unprecedented for it to happen. And yet look back over the last 2.5 years, none of this was something that we would have thought would have happened even 3 years ago. So as we really use our common sense, we apply critical thinking, we start sorting through the news and realize that a news article that says, let's see if we can pull that up again. A news article that says Spaceport takes over all military satellite communication. And you might say, satellite communication is different than military satellite. Well, you know what? The military has its hands in it all. And if we need to take a moment here, we certainly will. The reason that private companies are given billions of dollars for R&D is not because, the primary reason is that a private company develops under the under the curtain of being private. They have intellectual property. They don't have to divulge. They can grow things. They can hire the best talent. But if it's government, they have government overwatch. They have a budget. They have FOIA susceptibility. There's a lot of weaknesses there in growing Black Ops projects. But if you tuck it under a corporation, then in fact, you have a space between space, I guess wasn't the right word, but there's a break in the chain from the ability of the taxpayer, which we should be accountable to, in order to find out information to take us to to understand what's truly happening. But if in fact this information is provided and given as a gift, here's some technology, we want you to run under R&D, we're going to funnel a budget to you to match what you're putting in, but the match may be 1 billion to 1, you know how those games are played, then in fact the company they hire the better talent. People want to work for these companies rather than government, unless of course they're in elected office, then that's a whole nother game. But they are able to develop these without FOIA, without delving in to the secret arena of what's happening. So no, there are no satellites, American satellites, that are in space that the military does not have their hand in one way or another. If they've ever taken funds which they could not launch because they would not have the permission, then it's under the military. Now I'm going to go a step further, that any other satellite in space is also being monitored by the largest military on the planet. Therefore, all satellites in place are at least being monitored, if not controlled, under this arena is what we're being told. So again, connecting the dots, this article is a nice little article. Oh, that's interesting, doesn't pertain to me. And I'm going to say that this not only pertains to you retroactively, but pertains to you as a warning to pay attention, keep your eyes open, and keep your eyes on the ball so you're not fooled when this massive event rolls out before our eyes. Okay, well, blessings to everybody. I'm going to go ahead and research a little bit more into the rabbit hole here. But if anybody has feedback or has more information on this, then please go ahead and let us know as well. Have a wonderful day.